Hi, everybody. My name is Dave Clausen. I'm a psychologist with the school board. We usually introduce ourselves in multiple ways. So I'm a psychologist with the school board, been here for, I think it's 23 years. I think I was counting the other day. And equally important, I have two grown daughters. They're both into their 20s. And so I've been through a good chunk of the parenting cycle. I'm going to hand it over to Laura.
Hi, everybody. My name's Laura Bickle, also a psychologist with the school board. Haven't been here quite as long as Dave. I think I'm at 17 or 18 years. So it's been a while. Have two daughters as well in their 20s, in their early 20s. Tiffany, were you going to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Hi, I'm Tiffany Jell. I've been with the board over 25. I think I'm at 26 years. I have two kids, 15 and 17, so mine are the youngest. But I think we all have similar experiences, so we will add that to the conversation.
Absolutely. So today our topic is independence, which we which we're a ways through in some ways. I mean, I'm most of the way through. I would say my kids are almost entirely independent at this point, and I think Laura's a good chunk of the way too, and Tiffany's a bit. And what's interesting about independence is that it just looks different at different ages, but it is a really important concept. As you can see in our picture, we chose somebody young. Independence is important sort of at every age, and so that's one of the things that we want to identify as much as possible. It's developmental. It very much depends on your child, depends on context, depends on all kinds of things. As we were talking about independence, we thought independence kind of has two main ingredients to it. Actually, I shouldn't use that word because we're going to say it differently later.
That's a good game.
Independence has two sort of parts to it. One of them is responsibility. From a parent's perspective, if we think about independence with our kids, what we immediately move to is, well, is a child responsible enough to handle a bit of independence? That would be sort of the sentence that would go through my head most of the time. Laura, actually, I want you to explain the other part because you're the one who heard it firsthand, okay?
Yeah, so this actually came out in one of our previous lunch and learns that Dave and Tiffany and I have been doing over the last few years. And this was when my youngest daughter was still living at home before university, and she was kind of listening to a bit of what we were talking about. And we were talking about this idea of independence and responsibility and so forth. And she said to me after, she said, well, you got it a little bit right, but you're missing something. And I'm like, okay, what am I missing? She said, well, when you're talking about independence, you're talking about responsibility. You're talking about the things that you want us to do as teenagers. And she said, but what we're talking about when we're talking about independence is freedom. So there's sort of two sides of the same coin. When we're talking about independence from our perspective as parents, we're talking about the child taking on greater levels of responsibility, building competency. But the flip side to that for the child is freedom. So there's something in it for both sides when we're talking about independence. And so the next thing we're going to chat about, or what we're going to spend the majority of our time now, is sort of the ingredients, as Dave alluded to earlier. So we're going to talk about a few kind of main ideas of things that we think are helpful in building independence in our children. What we're going to talk about today is in no way prescriptive. So we're not saying this is exactly how you do it each and every time. We're just really kind of giving you guys some general ideas. And as we'll talk about as we go along, what independence looks like is very different for every child at every age, in every family, and in every different sociocultural group, et cetera. So there's no sort of clear, from ages 2 to 5, you should be doing this. From 5 to 7, you should be doing that. That's not the approach we're taking today at all. We're really just trying to kind of give you some general ideas of ways that you can help build independence in your kiddos. And I think we're over to you, Tiff.
A lot of little things to be hitting. So, okay, so like Laura's just said, there's a lot to consider when you're thinking about making a plan for independence. And so what we wanted to highlight were just a few areas that would be consistent across the age span, but adjust based on your own situation. So the first one is setting the stage. So mistakes are going to happen. And so we can control some things, but not everything. And so different kids learn differently. What works for one might not work for another. I'm just going to pause and let somebody in. And it needs to be appropriate. But preparing, setting the stage so that the failures or the problems or the mistakes that happen are not catastrophic. So I'm going to actually give an example for this one. My kids have been making their lunch since they were in junior kindergarten. And my son wanted strawberries. And so he wanted strawberries cut a certain way. So we got out a plastic plate. We got out the smallest paring knife you could ever imagine. We talked through it. We showed him. And then we let him cut his own strawberries for his lunch. And they must have been the smallest pieces I've ever seen in my life because he enjoyed that so much. So the idea of if you can in advance, consider what are the problems that could happen, what are the things you want to set up, what level of supervision, setting the stage so that it can be as successful as possible. Anything to add, you two?
Yeah, I'll add a bigger kid example. So this is a driving example where it's actually relatively easy to have fairly catastrophic results. So when my oldest daughter turned 16, she was quite nervous about driving. And we spent a whole bunch of time in parking lots that were abandoned, and we actually had this really nice roundabout in an industrial complex. And in the weekend, there was nobody there. So we could drive through the roundabout and all the rest of it. It was great. Then we had to go on the road. And so she was worried about going on the road. And quite frankly, I was a little bit concerned about, how's her judgment going to be about whether she can move out into traffic or not. And so what I had her do was I had her tell me her thinking process out loud. So this was sort of setting the stage and making parameters safe. She would say, "There's a car there; it's too close." And sometimes I would correct her. I would say, "No, you could have actually gone. That wasn't too close." But it's like fair enough. But then she would say, "There's a space. It's big enough. I can go." And if I didn't say anything, then she knew that she was absolutely right. But talking through that set safe parameters to allow for, something where if she did it wrong, it would have been bad. So there's another example of a way to handle things. And again, it's allowing them the responsibility, just like the knife example, but making sure that okay, yeah, nothing really bad's going to happen out of this. All right, and then we're moving on to letting the learning happen, and I think we all kind of like this picture because learning can be quite messy. And so I want to spend just a little bit of time running through learning and how it works, because I think it's really important to understand that not kids, people learn in different ways. Okay. And so there are three main ways. I'm not even sure I can remember them, but there are three main ways that people learn. The way we usually think people learn is we instruct them. We tell them, "Look, this is how you do it. Okay, now you do it." Instruction is actually one of the weakest ways for people to learn, especially any sort of experiential thing like how to cut a strawberry or how to drive a car. Telling people accomplishes almost nothing, quite frankly. And you will hear people say, "But I told them, but I told them." Yeah, you did tell them. And just because you told them doesn't mean that they can do it, that they have the skill to do it. Okay. So instruction is one way we learn. It's often one of the first things we do, and it's the thing that we're most inclined to use. Okay. Second way we learn is modeling. Okay. So I watch you do it, and then I have some idea of how to do it, and maybe I can do it myself. And we were talking about this with regard to the driving example. Sometimes we think people watch us do things, but they're not watching us at all. So I recall when my daughters got their license, they had absolutely no idea how to get anywhere. And it's how is this possible? We have driven here for your entire life. How do you not know where we're going? Modeling only works when people pay attention to what's being modeled. Okay. And for a kid in the back seat, well, it doesn't really matter how we get where we're going. It's just where we're going. That's all that matters. And so you'll find that sometimes you think you've provided a model, but maybe attention wasn't paid to that model. So it's really important to make sure that people actually pay attention. And now with phones and all of that sort of thing, many things grabbing at our attention, it can be really hard to pay attention to a model. Okay, so that's the second one. Third way we learn is through experience. And this is actually probably one of the strongest ways that we learn anything. And so, in the picture here, it looks like there's probably some experiential learning happening. But if I'm gonna move to sports for a second. One of the things I do outside of work time is I coach, and the sport I'm coaching is volleyball. And so I recall having a conversation with my brother, and I coach with my brother about teaching the kids how to block. And my brother was one of them who said, well, but I've told them and I've told them. And I said, yeah, no, it doesn't actually work. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get them to get their hands up and over the net and onto the other side, because that's how you block well. And what was most effective was not telling them that. What was most effective was having them stand on a chair and then us hitting balls at their hands. And they say, okay, put your hands here. What happened? Okay, put your hands here. What happened? Put your hands here. What happened? Oh, that worked. Yeah, that worked. That is what we have been telling you all year. But they didn't understand because the experience was completely different than the words are. Okay. I know, Laura and Tiffany, do you have an experiential learning example, or I don't know if we came up with any others, but yeah, feel free to jump in if you do. But learning through experience. So Tiffany's son learning how to cut with that paring knife is incredibly powerful. Okay. And so this is one of the strongest ways of learning, and it's messy. It's going to take time. It's going to take space. It's going to take repetition. Yeah, Tiffany.
I do have another one, and again, I'm going to go young, but you need to allow the child the time and the space to do it. So I often will be talking to families about, their kids being able to dress themselves in the morning, for example. And sometimes we just don't have time. We have to get out the door. And so keeping in mind that sometimes, oh, this is a setting the stage too. We need to plan enough time that if they need to get their snow pants on, like when it snows in, the end of March, allowing them the time and the space to be able to do that, and maybe walk away for a few minutes. Take a page out of like the daycares, right? They put it all in place, and then they walk away and let them try it. And that frustration and the practice and the pleasure and the pride they have at getting it done that's the experience we want. We want that moment of like, yeah, I did that.
Absolutely. And so this isn't always so easy to do. One of the reasons is that it's usually easier for us. So I'm expecting that Tiffany could have cut up the strawberries and put them in the bag within 30 seconds, and that her son, I don't know, what did he take? Did he take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes?
As long as we let him. Yep.
Yep. Yep. And so this is one of the things about letting the learning happening, right? You've got a 15-minute for 30-second trade-off, and in the moment, that's kind of painful. And so that's one of the things. So letting it happen is not an easy thing to do. But then if you think about all of the time that Tiffany saved as her kids packed their own lunch, something I quite frankly wish we had our kids do, which we did not. That's a huge savings, and it allows the sense of satisfaction and the pride that comes along with, hey, I can do it. I'm independent. I know actually that picture that we have, that child looks quite pleased with themselves when she's tying her shoes, right? That's this is what we're aiming for. Okay. Anything to add, you guys?
No, I think we're ready for the next slide. So, part of this, we're talking about experience and letting the learning happen. And the space where learning happens is often in the space of failure. right? So, part of building independence is knowing that they're not going to likely get things right the first time, second time, the third time, the fourth time. So mistakes will happen, failure will happen, and that is the space where growth happens. But what is hard for us as parents is to bear witness to that discomfort and to the failure and to the frustration. And we're in a very interesting era of really pathologizing any kind of unpleasant emotion. And that it's okay to feel discomfort. It's okay to feel frustration. It's okay to feel these things. And it doesn't mean that, a child is traumatized by those negative emotions when they experience failure. It is part of learning that tolerance for distress. And I think that that's a big piece. And that's on the parent part and on the part of the child. So the child has to develop distress tolerance for when something doesn't go right the first time. We as parents have to develop distress tolerance for our own children's distress. And that's often the hardest part. And I heard something the other day, and I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but it was something to the effect of, when we do too much for our children, we are stealing their self-esteem and adding it to our own. So it makes us feel better by doing things for them and protecting them and all of these things. But they're not then building self-esteem, because really self-esteem comes from a sense of competence, a sense of mastery. So, part of this in terms of building independence is building their self-esteem, building their sense of competence, their sense of I can do it. And it's not easy as parents to let that happen sometimes, to let go, to let the learning happen, to let the frustrations happen. And as a parent of two now grown daughters, there's been a lot of tears over the years in my household, theirs and mine. And it's not easy, and it's okay to actually articulate all of that to your children as well, right? To say, it's hard for me to watch you be upset, but it's okay. You're going to get through this. We're going to get through this together. Oh, wow, Laura, powerful statement. Well put. What did I say? Which part of it? Darn it. I wish I could remember when I say good things. So that's the piece about handling discomfort. And I think too, it's allowing your child to be the perfectly imperfect person that they are, right? So, when my kids we would go on family trips with my sister and her kids, and I'd have my kids, and I let my kids pack their own suitcases with guidance. So by the time that they could read, I would make them a list, and I'd say, pack, 2 hoodies, 2 pairs of pants, 5 pairs of socks, whatever. I would have a list. And then I would say, you guys go for it. My sister, on the other hand, packed her son's clothes for them. And her rationale was, well, I want everything they wear to match. And I mean, I didn't care. You have mismatched socks, like whatever, but you have to be comfortable with, that someone else might look at your kid and go, oh my goodness, they're not wearing matching clothes, right? So there's that discomfort too. And I think, Tiffany, you had an example of that as well.
I think sometimes we're harder on ourselves as parents because we're worried about what other parents are going to think. So mine was a packing example too, where my kids are parts of guides and scouts, and my son packed his own bag again with the list. And when he came back, he was wearing his uniform, like the button-up scout uniform. And like, it was a hot August weekend, and he had packed no t-shirts. So he problem solved it over the weekend. So he wore his pajama shorts during the day. And so that's the other thing. We talk about self-esteem you commented on, but he learned to problem solve in the moment because he had made a mistake, but he didn't walk around topless, which is good. But you have to be okay with the fact that, like, the scout leaders, I was feeling like, oh my gosh, they're going to think I didn't prepare him well enough. But you know what? They had seen probably worse than that. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I always think when I see a child, well, if I see that's a big question. If I see a child that is, sort of not put together perfectly, I always think, oh, well, it's pretty clear they dress themselves, right? Like, good for them. So, you'll get evaluation on the negative side, but you'll also get evaluation on the positive side. Okay. I think I'll give a quick example. Oh, okay. Yeah, go. No, we're running out of time. Let's
okay.
go.
Sorry. So the last thing was to know that You're going to make mistakes, and so are your kids. And that it is a balance that we have to try to find. You might think about what you think is a reasonable expectation, what you think they can handle, and then realize it was either too easy or too hard, or you needed to set the stage differently, or build it up, or just adjust be kind to yourself in knowing you're not going to get it right every time. And it's not going to be a straight line necessarily in their learning. And for me, it was that I have two kids that are very different. And so what worked for one did not work for the other, and you had to adjust that way. And I think one of my learnings in doing these presentations and whatnot is being able to model for my kids that it's okay that I made a mistake too, and just naming it. You know what? I thought that was going to go great, and it did not. So what are we going to do now? So that idea of just making adjustments along the way.
It's funny, Tiffany, after we when we were preparing for this lunch and learn last week, Audrey was here, my youngest was here. And she said to me, and we had talked about some examples, and she said, I noticed that in your all your lunch and learns, all of the examples are about me, and there's not many about Grace. And I thought to myself, oh, you're right. And then I said, well, that's because you guys are very different. And I said, you were more amenable to these sort of techniques and things. Whereas with Grace, my oldest, I said, I felt like I had to do more drive-by parenting, just like kind of say something and just kind of keep going. So I said, yes. So my examples do tend to be more abound more with you than with your sister. But so there was a good example of, it's different for every kid, right? And what works for one is not going to work for the other. And yeah, as Tiffany said, we're going to make mistakes. We like to give all the examples of our superstar parenting moments. We could spend a whole lunch and learn series, I'm sure, on the mistakes that we've made as parents as well. So you got to be kind to yourself.
Okay, I think we have a hand up.
If you want to, do we want to wrap up actually the presentation part, and then we can do?
I want to say one more thing about balance, and then maybe we can turn off the recording. Okay. So if we return to the first thing that we talked about, which was responsibility and freedom, it's also important that we maintain a balance between those two things. So our tendency as parents is going to be to say, okay, you want independence. So that means you have this responsibility, this responsibility, this responsibility. And we may not be quite as quick with the freedoms. And so we need to make sure that these two things balance with each other. Flip side is, if your child is asking for freedom, then it's balanced with responsibility.
Final thoughts, Laura, or shall we go to questions?
We can go to questions if people have questions.
Okay.
And I'll say too, we had talked about, and maybe we'll do this next year. I don't know if we've committed to this, but we talked about when we were preparing for this that we could almost do a series on how to build independence in the different age groups, because it looks very different, right? Building independence in the teenage and young adult years is very different than building independence in a preschool age child or a school age child. So stay tuned. We might wind up doing that next year. I don't know. Maybe.